Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for June 9th, 2023. I'm Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen. And also present, if I can find the Zoom window again, are Aaron McHale, Emma Harrell, Ralph Kohler, Simo Helston, and Thomas. Thank you all for coming. And I've got my browser open to the issue for today's meeting. For the sake of the recording, the issue number is 3364446. And one thing that came up is current issue about reorganizing block items in the admin menu. So let me just follow the link to the meta issue. And then what we're talking about is the issue to move block layout from structure to appearance, which is issue 3318112. And let me also share the link for my test site in the Zoom chat. If anyone wants to log in, you can use admin/admin. And I'm actually running the 11.x branch, which is basically the 10.1.x branch. But yay, we have moved. We have already succeeded in moving the custom block library, now just blocks list under content where it belongs. We now have directly under the structure menu, block types. And this being Drupal, it took a long time to get that done. What we wanted to do is take this remaining link block layout and move it under appearance. And the issue to do that was RTBC and is now marked as postponed. And that happened just a day or two ago. And Christina Chimias, who's the topic maintainer for usability, or one of the topic maintainers for usability, actually came over to my table at DrupalCon and apologized for that action before she did it. But Aaron expressed some concerns on Slack that what it's postponed on is this rather broad issue. Is this a meta issue? 2755613 to restructure the admin interface. Yeah, this is in the ideas issue queue. Or project Drupal core ideas. And Aaron is concerned that nothing should be postponed on this because this issue might drag on forever. Aaron, is that a fair summary, or do you want to add a little bit to it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'd be fair, I was trying to be quite diplomatic in my assessment, but I think that's accurate. Yeah, it's just, through this whole thing, we've one of the things that's allowed us to, in some ways, do the impossible, and get this far is the fact we've had really tightly scoped issues, and so postponing moving the layout to appearance on this issue feels like it could. There's a big risk that it could drag on for much longer, because this is a much bigger scope. And I don't know how well defined the scope of this is. The thing that we put up, because in the moving block layouts to appearance, so there was a few ideas that had been proposed in that issue, and the one that we settled on for the initial sort of move is just to move it as is and mirror how configuration works, which is essentially what block layout does right now. So under admin appearance, if you go to configure a theme, you have a tab for each theme. block layout is essentially doing the same thing. Sorry, it's, yeah, settings rather. You'll see there's a tab for each theme. And block layout is essentially following the same pattern minus global settings. So the idea for the specific issue is to just move block layout under there, mimic the behavior as it does, and then our plan was there's another meta issue to look at reorganizing, a more broader reorganization of the appearance section. And so in that issue, we thought, okay, we can, because we had some ideas around how we could completely restructure the appearance section to be a bit more like how content types or fields work, so that rather than it being kind of split by function, I guess, as it is right now, it would be sort of grouped by theme. And in that theme, you go and you can see a tab for settings and a tab for block layout, etc. So yeah, that was kind of where we were heading. And obviously, I haven't been DrupalCon, so I wasn't part of this discussion, but some people here have. So that's where I think we could maybe have a discussion today about this and see what, at the very least, if we can get some kind of a plan or resolution going forward.
So what I could say is that this ideas issue or this meta issue is actually actively being worked on. They are doing usability testing. There's going to be a card sorting exercise available in about a week, I believe, to get some broader user input on how the menu should be organized. And Christina herself, I've been told, she didn't tell me this directly, but someone else told me that she's being sponsored for 6 months by Lullabot to work on this. So I think there's actually going to be a lot of movement, and it's not so much postponing the block layout link on that issue, but making it part of that issue. And I think that it is actually going to be fixed in time for 10.2, within the next 6 months. Thomas, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that I'm on the fence. I agree with Aaron's concerns, because while I'm hearing that Christina's working on it, this is such a huge thing to change, to do that meta issue. It feels very optimistic to think that it'll be there in time for 11. And my concern would be that reality may insert itself and it gets pushed off to 12 or later. I think, optimistically speaking, it does make sense to make the conversation part of a more holistic approach. But I feel pretty strongly that, and maybe I need to be being vocal in the context of the larger meta issue, but we have a problem with definitions, and I don't know if card sorting and things like that really get at the underlying challenges of things like, what does structure mean? Like, is structure really getting at data structure and how things are built? And like, what is the meaning and definition of appearance? And I worry that UX is going to be taking an approach, the exercises we're going to do in the large meta issue, of where people's comfort is. And we've got a lot of risks around what the common, I guess, Drupal island impression of language is versus what the broader definitions are. Like, appearance is very clearly defined, and layout is part of appearance from a kind of universal perspective. And so I'm just worried, again, I think it's very easy to bike shed, because I'm doing it right now, right here. And I'm one person talking to himself. So I think that your initial statement of tackling these things one at a time is how we've been successful in achieving a lot of positive change, and taking this and shoving it into something that is risky in my mind, no matter how well intentioned and no matter how well funded, is a significant risk towards getting this change in. And this is an important change from my perspective.
And let me just see if I can find the screenshots. There were suggestions at one point to totally rearrange the appearance menu as
Yeah, and
as
they're
part of
definitely
this
there
issue.
somewhere, because I remember we, yeah, there's, in fact, it might be it might be the first screenshot there, Benji. It's just slightly hard to see, but I think the first one has like a button for block layout potentially, but there was definitely more. So the one before that one, actually, there's another screenshot just above it. I think that one has, yeah, so that one has a button for block layout. So this was which we could still, we could do that anyway because we already have a settings button, but there's definitely another one that showed how we might reorganize. I think it might have been further down in the issue, actually. If you were to keep scrolling a little bit more.
The next one.
Yeah, so what we can see here is how the tabs are organized or grouped by theme. So kind of like how in the field UI or in the content types, you select the content type, you select the field, and then you get tabs dedicated to that content item or that field. It's the same kind of approach here, where you can see in the first screenshot there, it's settings for Umami theme. There's also a layout tab, which would take you to the block layout specific for Umami. And you can kind of see that in the second screenshot. And then the third screenshot there is the top level appearance page where we have the theme tab, which I think was called list before. We have the update tab and a global settings tab. And the global settings right now is just one level down under settings, but the idea would be promoting it to the top level tabs there. So that was the kind of next step, but there is the more broader issue to kind of reorganize, more holistically review the appearance section, much like we've done with blocks, but at a slightly higher level.
Yeah, so I think that the decision has been made. The RC1 for Drupal 10.1 was released, I think, yesterday, maybe the day before. And as far as Drupal 10.1 is concerned, the block layout link is going to stay there. That's, we're not going to change that. We can certainly push to make it happen in 10.2. Again, although the issue is marked as postponed on the meta issue, the ideas issue, I think it will actually be done as part of that issue and as part of a discussion of exactly the ideas you've been talking about, whether appearance should be organized by themes or whether themes should be the second level of tabs. So I'd like to cut off discussion here. I'd like to try to find a time when Christina can join one of our weekly meetings. And
yeah, it's unfortunate she's not here today, but
right.
I suspect she's probably jet lagged or on an international flight or something.
That's right. She was in the same room as me yesterday, and I had a 2-hour flight. She had a much longer flight to get home. So let's think in terms of Drupal 10.2. Let's participate in the discussion of how this should best be organized, and let's get some input from Christina and figure out what the next steps should be.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And what I can say, constructively, I can see there is a lot of discussion going on in Slack in the admin UI channel. that's sort of just over the last couple of days around this, and as you talked about the card sorting exercise and things. So I am optimistic that we will get these things done, and we know that we need to do something about the toolbar. Like it cannot. We've known that for a long time. It can't stay in its current state, right? We need to do something about that anyway. So these things will all happen. It's just a case of we've already accepted, as you said, that it's not going to happen in 10.1. We knew that already. But it's I suppose it's more a question of when, what order can we do things in, and how do we make sure that some issues don't become too big and too much, because there's always that risk of them never, things never get done if the issue becomes too big.
Okay, any other comments on this for now? I saw Thomas gave a thumbs up to the discussion of trying to have a meeting where Christina can make it. And are there other issues? We also get a thumbs up from Simo. Are there other issues we should talk about today?
I was thinking, should we talk about those role descriptions? There was a Slack discussion about.
Is that one of the issues listed here?
Let's see, I'll try to find that one.
I've pasted the link in the chat.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
This is issue 256287. Woo, from 2008. To give roles a description value. Is this the one you were thinking about, Simo?
Yeah, this is the one.
So can you lead the discussion on this?
Yeah. So it's kind of a, in a way, it's a quite straightforward thing. I don't have that patch installed, but it's adding descriptions for different roles. It's kind of a following similar pattern than having descriptions for content types or that different kind of things. So in a way, the concept is quite clear. It's been going on for a long time, and it has been tagged for. Oh, on 4th, yeah, on the 4th this month actually, Yoroi crossed strike through the, like, removed the needs usability review tag. But I think here, yeah, I think my question here was that what kind of descriptions should we have for roles? So because it shouldn't be too technical, and it shouldn't be so it kind of a what kind of default descriptions to have for the roles. But the needs usability review tag has been removed from here. So I wonder, is this something that we should discuss?
Just a minute. Because I think I can apply the patch pretty easily.
And I think Ralph has something to comment or say.
Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
Just 2 details I've already posted on Slack in the conversation. At first, I agree with Simo in regards of the description, that the description is not very helpful at the moment with the strings that are provided, but I have 2 points, one nitpick and one more serious one in the context of the patch. One, it's if you could quickly scroll up again just for the screenshot.
top.
Yeah, on the top in the issue summary, a little bit down, a bit more down, please. And for the after, yeah, you have on the after for edit role page, you have the label for the field description and then the description for this role. The description for the field is sort of redundant, could either be striked or could tell where the description is actually shown. But the problem I really have with the descriptions is, again, in the context of the roles settings. If you could go back, yeah. And if you have descriptions in, and for example, let's say you have author and have some harmless
Right,
description. Oops,
I've applied the patch, and I'm wondering why I don't see the new screen. Oh, I'm sorry, the patch failed. That's why it's not showing up. Okay, so we'll have to work with the screenshots. So
yeah, if you have, for example, the content editor role with a simple, harmless description for that role, and on the roles setting page, there are 2 or 3 open issues in that regard. At the moment, you're still able to simply change the administration role from administrator, the default, to, let's say, for example, the content editor. If that happens by accident, there's at the moment no indication what's the active role, and that way, with the descriptions, it's a bit problematic. And yeah, I agree with because I've suggested, for example, for the moment, as long as the other issues are not in, to move the description for the administrator role to the role settings page. But yeah, as Aaron said, it's adds complexity, and it's also a bit out of place there. But it would be a fail-safe, because yeah, the issue I saw a real-life example where that happened on a actual page, and the person responsible was unable to get into the page for 2 days and figuring out what the problem was. And that's serious.
So it sounds to me like you're talking about this related issue. Display which role is the administrator role on admin people roles. This is issue 3229028.
That is one of them, I suppose. Yep. But there are a few more related ones. Yeah, that in the reference, if you could go back,
just
on the reference by display which role is the administrator role on the user edit page is one. Also, and there's a third one, I suppose.
okay, so we were talking earlier about how it's important to make progress to scope our issues. And these are certainly improvements that could be made, but it's we already have separate issues for them. Why do you think that we should do more as part of this issue than what's already here?
The scoping is okay, but it just meant without at least one of the others in. I have a bad feeling about this is just the thing.
Joined briefly by Eric. Hello. You have to leave your daily stand-up at 10:30. Is that in 2 minutes? And I think, Thomas, you wanted to reply to what Ralph was saying?
Yes, thank you. I agree with the importance of everything that Ralph said, but I also agree with you that I think that the description field, I think of it from a data perspective, and I think of Thomas's perfect universe where you can seamlessly and easily move roles between sites and even into external data warehouses, and having description on the fields is, for lack of a better term, mission critical. And it doesn't block any of the improvements that Ralph has identified as critical. But I don't think that there's a dependency. I think that we could move forward with this issue and get those descriptions in, and emphasize that we still need to get those other changes in to indicate, because to me that's a field that should also be available, that allows us to identify which one of the roles is administrative. Like that's something that should be there from a data perspective. So, but they're not at cross purposes. This description of a field is not the same thing as a flag on the field that says this is the administrative field. That's my opinion.
Yeah, for me also, it's kind of it's this having this current situation is that we don't have indicators for what is the administrator role in the list at all, and then with the available possibility to have descriptions, it's possible to at least manually add that information, even if it has to be always updated manually. So it's kind of a for sites with multiple users. So it's possible to use the description to give that information, whereas the current situation is that we don't have anything. And of course, the automatic version of telling which is the administrator role, that's something that we want to have. But it's kind of I don't see also if this could be done first.
Two more points. One, consider the distinction between data models storing things in the database and presenting things. And we're all pretty familiar with this because we work with a content management system. This issue is about adding an extra field to the database. And that's and the other issues are about displaying information that's already there. And we always want to get the data model right before we make changes to the display, because changes to the display can be made at any time. So that's the first point. The second point, we may or may not have a way to do it in the admin UI, but just by editing some YAML files and importing configuration, you can have more than one administrator role. I can't imagine why you would want to do that, but it's possible. So there might be more than one admin role, and we might want to have something like an extra column with just a checkbox for the admin role. And of course, we can bike shed how we're going to present it. So I think we're developing a consensus that that these other things that Ralph brought up can be treated as follow-up issues, and we already have follow-up issues for several of them. Is there an exception, Ralph? Is there one of these things that really should be done at the same time as this issue?
Not necessarily. It's okay. I was just worried, but it's okay.
So I guess Roy Schulten already removed the needs usability review tag. It is still labeled needs work. When I tried it, the patch didn't apply to the current branch. So comment 76 points out that it got put up here. So it looks like some changes to the test fixtures are what is holding us in the needs work.
Yeah, but what I was thinking that should we look at the descriptions, or should we think about the descriptions for the roles, or is that something? So is that like somebody else's responsibility? Because I think if the technical things get sorted out, I think we should have, but by that time we should have should be able to have kind of a decent descriptions for the standard installation profile roles. Because I think the current patch has for administration user kind of that this role is given to admin. So the kind of to have those descriptions kind of so that they are meaningful. Or so, or actually, no, I'm not saying meaningful, but having them help so that they are helpful for the user.
Okay, so the current patch does include the descriptions for the roles in the standard profile.
Yes.
Is that shown in the screenshots?
Yeah, it is. So I'm thinking like, should we try to make suggestions like for administrator describing what it means to be administrator for standard. So I think one thing would be that administrator gets permissions by default for new modules, and this kind of it's not really accurate. That's kind of an anonymous user role is given to users that are not logged in. It's not given to users, but it's kind of assumed, or kind of it's kind of a little bit. Those haven't been thought properly, and I'm thinking that should we try to, in this group, should we try to think about those?
Okay, that seems like something that's in scope for the issue. Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with Simo. The place we could probably add the most value here is trying to come up with good descriptions for anonymous authenticated administrator, because those are probably the ones that could be the particularly anonymous user. Like how do you communicate that to somebody who's not familiar with Drupal and not familiar with what that means, or like even authenticated user? So where these descriptions can add value is really saying, okay, what does it mean to have that role? And particularly for anonymous, because a user doesn't, there's the anonymous role is a funny one in that you can't assign a user the anonymous role. It's the role obviously that's given to people who are visiting the site who aren't logged in. So if we can use the descriptions to help describe that, which is kind of what we can see has happened already, but perhaps we could maybe come up with, there might be better descriptions that we could come up with, or maybe more concise, more helpful. So yeah, that's probably where we could add the most value for sure.
So let me see if I can open up maybe a Google Doc or something. Give me a minute. Here we go. I'll paste a link into the Zoom chat. And I will open this up in my browser and sharing. Aim for sharing. And then anyone with the link can edit. Done. So, anonymous. Content. Edit. And administrator. So one thing that bothers me a little, and let me try to find, yeah. One thing that bothers me about this is that these are not complete sentences. Right there, they have capital, they start with capitals and they end with a period, but they're not complete sentences. And I wonder, maybe we should aim for 2 sentences, for each one. So something like a user who is not logged in has this role. Often this role is given permission to view content. Does that seem like a good model?
I was thinking, so this, I'm starting to feel this might be too long descriptions for default, but I was thinking that this kind of would be one approach. I'm posting to the chat. So this kind of explaining how the permissions, like through the permissions, but I'm thinking that if it's too technical to talk about permissions here.
I'm just pasting in what I see in the patch. So you go ahead, Thomas.
So the pattern you gave conceptually makes sense to me, but it felt awkward. So I want to, I guess, work on the language, but I mean, I think pattern-wise, start there and then move on. I think that there are 2 approaches we could go with. One would be to go through the issues where, for instance, some of the newer roles were added and see if there are any solid descriptions of those roles, like what the justification was for why we have author or content editor or whatever the name, I guess content editor, whatever the latest roles are. We want to try and pull it from the discussions. So I guess putting a dependency for where within the Drupal community, when these things were created historically, trying to pull that intent in. And I guess the second approach might be to look at what the dominant mental models are like for everyone. So when people are coming to Drupal from anywhere, regardless of if they're a programmer or a person on the street, what does the word what is the actual definition of these terms, and trying to come up or triangulate, taking what those known definitions are versus the intention of the role, like what its context is within Drupal.
Yeah, Emma writes in the chat, it may be helpful for the descriptions to include the functions each role has, e.g. as an authenticated user, what can I do and what can I not do?
I'll just qualify that a bit, because as from my experience, like the users here are two people. You've either been assigned a role, so you might be using Drupal to create content or edit content, and you might be confused as to why you don't have access to something or why something doesn't work, for example. But also it's from the perspective of like the person controlling that. So maybe like what we would call like a lead publisher. So you want to be able to lock down certain parts of the site or CMS to different users, and you want to be able to. So I think, yeah, kind of going on from Thomas's point, it would be useful to know historically where the roles came from, and then maybe list out typical functions that are associated with them, if that makes sense.
So only one of these roles was added at all recently, and that's content editor. Anonymous, authenticated, and administrator have been with us for a long time. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think that this is probably a blessing and a curse. But the thing to keep in mind is that we are just establishing what the defaults are in the standard profile here, because you can go in and change these descriptions, just as you can go in and change the permissions that you assign to these roles. So because these permission descriptions are going to be specific, well, kind of specific to the standard role, we can also think about what do these roles, what can they do in the standard profile? Similarly, what could they do in Umami? And that could be our starting point. But we also we set the standard here for how people are also going to describe these when they add their own roles or they make changes. So we can use that to think about, as somebody who's setting up a site for the first time, what's the most helpful information to put here to describe these roles. And yeah, I agree with Emma's point as well. Like I think these are definitely areas where we can help people understand, particularly if you have access to, if you're not the one who set up the site, but you may have access to edit some of these roles or create some roles. We can use this to help people also understand what a role is doing.
In the Slack discussion, I was thinking if we should look into those user personas where we have some of these roles we have in the user personas, so that what kind of motivations an administrator user has or content editor, and then there we have also some other roles as well defined.
So let's try to get some text on the page to sort of focus the discussion. So I've suggested something for the anonymous role. What I put in first is what's in the patch, which aside from being incomplete sentences is also not very helpful. Administrator, the role given to admin users, that's not adding anything to the title. So here's my suggestion for anonymous. A user who is not logged in has this role. This role is typically given permission to view content and sometimes to add comments. So if you'd rather focus on the purpose of the role rather than the specific permissions assigned to it, what would you say there instead of that second sentence? Feel free to type in the doc. I think if you have the link, you have access, and I pasted the link into the chat.
I'm just suggesting visitor because, like, oh, well, maybe, yeah, just I think it might be helpful for anonymous, particularly because, like, there's a distinction between somebody who's a user means somebody who's logged in, and a visitor means somebody who's, well, it can mean somebody who's not logged in. So we have to be careful when we use the word user because it implies like they have an account, I think.
That's right. And of course, there's the old quip that there are only two industries who refer to their customers as users. Go ahead, Thomas. You're still muted.
Sorry, I was starting to type in the document. So in my mind, I think of the definitions as something that describes the function of a given term. So what is the function of a human being who is anonymous? What is the function of a human being who's authenticated, et cetera, et cetera? And so, for instance, when I look at all users have this role, I was trying to make a comment about it. That is a level of access that everyone, like, I don't think anonymous has permissions that authenticated doesn't have. So when we say, it isn't necessarily implied with the word users. Like it really, to me, it's confusing because I think of someone who's visiting the website is still a user. Anonymous versus authenticated is just an umbrella, where anonymous covers the broadest range of human beings accessing the application. And so I'm trying to think of each of these terms, and more importantly, how do we establish the descriptive pattern that people should follow when they add additional roles? Because I think that in creating these four things, we're also trying to help the community understand how to use the description field on roles in an effective pattern, because it would not be useful if these four things have these like pitch perfect descriptions, and then after that you have 10 different roles that say things like a user who touches photos, a user who changes blocks, a user who does taxonomy. Like, if we want to establish that, I'm not sure how we can train this pattern that we're trying to develop so that it's also used in future things. Like, so maybe more than just a description field, we should be thinking about how we can create that meta pattern so that we're handing people a way to create useful descriptions.
So let's give not just good defaults, but also good examples for people to follow.
Yes.
Along those lines, there is nothing to say about content editor. And the other three roles, the ones we've had for a long time, are the only special ones. Anonymous is anyone who's not logged in. Authenticated is anyone who is logged in. Administrator has all permissions. And there is nothing at all similar that you can say about content editor or any other role that you add. So it's kind of good that we have content editor so that we will have one example of a free-form role. This role is whatever you make it. But of course, the standard profile does assign specific permissions, and we can use those as a starting point. So, Thomas, your hand is still raised. Again, I encourage you to type into the Google Doc and come up with some proposals for concrete discussions.
So how do we feel about visitor or user? Because it'd be at least good to make a decision about that.
I'm happy to use visitor, especially for anonymous. Are you suggesting that we use it for all of the roles?
No, I was thinking where I made the suggestion for not specifically for anonymous, just to help distinguish the fact that this is for people who, like, you don't assign this role to a user. It's people who are not logged into the site. It's a way to effectively the purpose of the anonymous role is to be able to assign some permissions to anybody who isn't logged in. And the authenticated role is the flip side of that. You can assign permissions to this role that everybody who's logged in will get. And actually, maybe that's something to communicate in the descriptions.
That anonymous and authenticated are complementary roles.
Yes. And yeah, and that just how, yeah, that you can essentially, yeah, and that, you know, like one, if you're not logged in, you can give permissions to everybody who's not logged in, you can give permissions to everybody who is logged in, kind of thing.
We're coming close to the end of the hour. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left.
I had one point, Benji, if that's okay.
Speak up a little.
I have one point, if that's okay.
Sure.
I was realizing that in looking at these definitions, we're defining them in the context of website users. And in a decoupled environment, or in an environment where there may be roles for data for machines, essentially. So machine roles, or other things that are using APIs, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering if for our big three, anonymous, authenticated, administrator, we should indicate that this is part of the like a website paradigm or a non-decoupled environment. Like, might it make sense to say, hey, this is the default or usual way of these things existing, and then indicating when people are creating descriptions, they can specify if something is a machine role, et cetera, et cetera. Because that would be very helpful information to have, and that would indicate some knowledge that is critical, that is not available to someone adding content or adding roles later in life, not adding roles, adding roles to a user later in life who may need to know what those definitions are, because you shouldn't give a machine role, for instance, to a human being. And I'm just thinking it's different in our new context of decoupled or progressively decoupled environments.
I'm not sure that technically there's a distinction. I typically, if you're accessing an API provided by Drupal, you don't have any authentication, in which case you have the same access that an anonymous user has, or you do have some sort of authentication, and typically you're accessing as a particular user.
I guess what I'm getting at, though, is that it's a pattern that would make sense in the context of how a lot of other software operates in the world, and it would be a healthy one for us to be having if we want to be a essentially first class decoupled environment. Like it's very strange that we wouldn't be able to differentiate between a Slack / command authenticating and a person, because there would be nothing to differentiate those things. And you can't look at the data patterns. You can't look at access patterns. There's a lot of missing information.
So is the role description the appropriate place to put that? Does that belong in the description of any particular role?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I just think it was an interesting question I had. So I'm proposing it more than anything.
Okay, well, we have just a couple of minutes left. I can leave this Google Doc open as long as people are interested. We can continue the discussion on Slack. And when we have some good proposals, let's add them to the issue. It already needs work because it needs a reroll. It needs some updates to the test fixtures, I guess. What we're proposing is technically the easiest change to make, but will have a big impact on the usability of this issue. Any other last comments?
Should we link this Google Doc to the thread where this was discussed in Slack?
I don't think that's too helpful. Let's just use the Google Doc maybe today, possibly over the weekend, and when we have some good recommendations, let's just add those recommendations to the issue.
Okay.
So just one final thing, I'd like to flag that in Slack on Tuesday, I posted an issue where I thought we could try working on asynchronously, because we have the situation where we do have a lot of issues to review, and quite often we get issues that are text changes or wording rewrites, and we could potentially be doing those asynchronously and using the meeting times for more complex things like exactly what we're doing right now. So yeah, just to flag that it's there, please go contribute. I know Ralph posted saying he wasn't able to reproduce the problem, but so I need to look into that. But yeah, just to flag that for everybody, it'd be good to maybe try out an asynchronous approach to some of the issues that might help us get through the backlog. So just want to flag that.
Okay. Thank you all, and hope to see you all again next week.
Okay, thanks.
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 Next week,
Bye.
everyone.